The hospital room was wrapped in a silence so thick it felt like a living thing, pressing against the walls and settling over everything like a heavy blanket. Aurelia Fenwick lay motionless in the narrow bed, her small frame barely making an impression on crisp white sheets. Her eyes remained firmly shut, not from sleep, but from a deliberate refusal to acknowledge the world around her. When Travis Kelce stepped through the doorway, his presence seemed to fill the cramped space. But Aurelia didn't even flinch. She had perfected the art of pretending visitors didn't exist. Her father, Corwin Hather, stood near the window with his arms crossed tightly over his chest, exhaustion written in every line of his face. The dark circles under his eyes told the story of too many sleepless nights and too many false hopes. Junia Belrose, the nurse who had been caring for Aurelia for weeks, looked up from adjusting the IV drip. She offered Travis a weak smile, but her eyes carried a warning. This wasn't going to be easy. The room felt charged with unspoken pain and the weight of impossible circumstances. Travis moved slowly toward the bed, his usual confidence replaced by careful uncertainty. He had visited sick children before, but something about this moment felt different, more fragile, more final. The silence stretched between them all like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest disturbance. Then, with a gentleness that seemed to contradict his size, Travis reached out and carefully took Aurelia's small hand in his. Her fingers were cold and limp, offering no response to his touch. Corwin's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "This isn't going to help anything," he said, his words heavy with the bitterness of a man who had watched hope die too many times. "Nothing is going to help." But Travis didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned closer to Aurelia, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper as he spoke words that would change everything. What he said in that moment was so unexpected, so profound, that even Junia held her breath. Junia Belrose had been working in pediatric oncology for 7 years, long enough to recognize the signs of a family approaching the breaking point. She watched from the corner of the room as Travis Kelce settled into the uncomfortable plastic chair beside Aurelia's bed, his large frame making the hospital furniture look toy-like by comparison. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across the small room, highlighting every tired line on Corwin Hather's face. Aurelia hadn't opened her eyes since Travis had arrived 20 minutes earlier. This was her newest defense mechanism. If she couldn't see the parade of well-meaning visitors, maybe they would stop coming. Maybe everyone would stop pretending that forced smiles and empty encouragement could somehow undo the cruel mathematics of her diagnosis. At 8 years old, she had already developed a sophistication about death that most adults never achieve. "She's been like this for 3 days, Corwin said quietly, not bothering to lower his voice. "Ever since the last round of visitors, some local politicians wanting photo opportunities. They kept asking her to smile, to look hopeful for the cameras." His laugh was bitter and sharp. "Hope, as if hope pays medical bills, shrinks tumors." Travis shifted uncomfortably his chair, unsure how to respond to such raw honesty. He had come here expecting to offer comfort, maybe share some laughs, sign an autograph or two. The hospital staff had briefed him about Aurelia's condition, but they hadn't prepared him for the suffocating weight of grief that permeated every inch of this room. "The Make-A-Wish people were here last week," Corwin continued, his voice growing harder with each word. "They wanted to know what Aurelia's dream was. You know what she told them? She said her dream was to wake up and not hurt anymore. That's it. Not meeting celebrities or going to Disney World. Just not hurting." Junia busied herself checking Aurelia's chart, but Travis could see the pain in her eyes. This was clearly affecting her too, watching this family slowly disintegrate under the pressure of circumstances no one should have to endure. The nurse had developed her own coping mechanisms over the years, but some cases cut deeper than others. "I don't know why they keep sending," Corwin said, finally looking directly at Travis. "No offense to you personally, but what exactly is this supposed to accomplish? You can't cure cancer with a handshake. You can't make the pain go away with a pep talk. All you can do is remind us of everything she's never going to have." Travis found his voice for the first time since entering the room. "I'm not here to cure anything," he said quietly. "I'm not here to make promises I can't keep." "Then why are you here?" Corwin asked, his tone challenging but not hostile. "Just tired. So incredibly tired." "I honestly don't know," Travis admitted. "Someone told me about Aurelia, and I felt like I needed to meet her. I can't explain it better than that." Aurelia's eyes fluttered open for just a moment, long enough to glance at Travis before closing again. It was the first sign of life she had shown since his arrival, and everyone in the room noticed. Junia paused in her work, Corwin straightened slightly, and Travis leaned forward almost imperceptibly. "She hears everything," Junia said softly, even when she pretends not to. "Sometimes I think she's protecting herself by staying distant. It's easier than getting attached to people who are just going to leave." The observation hung in the air like an accusation. How many visitors had come and gone from this room, offering brief moments of distraction before returning to their normal lives? How many promises of staying in touch had dissolved the moment they walked out that door? Travis reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small football, about the size of a stress ball. It was nothing special, just a promotional item he had picked up somewhere along the way. He placed it gently on the bed beside Aurelia's hand, not trying to force her to take it, just leaving it there as an offering. "I brought this," he said, speaking to her even though her eyes remained closed. "It's not magic or anything. It's just a football, but I thought maybe you could hold on to it if you wanted." Aurelia's eyelids twitched, but she didn't open them. Her fingers moved slightly, close enough to touch the small football, but not quite making contact. It was like watching someone test the temperature of water before deciding whether to swim. Corwin watched this interaction with a mixture of hope and dread. He had seen his daughter's interest sparked before, only to watch it fade when the harsh reality of her situation reasserted itself. Part of him wanted to protect her from another disappointment, while another part desperately wanted something, anything, to bring light back into her eyes. "She used to love sports," Corwin said, his voice softer now. "Before all this started, she played soccer, was actually pretty good at it, fast little thing. The doctors said she might have been able to get a scholarship someday if..." He didn't finish the sentence. The conditional tense had become too painful to navigate. Travis nodded, understanding the weight of interrupted dream. "What position did she play?" "Forward. She loved to score goals. Always celebrated like she had just won the World Cup, even in practice." For the first time since Travis had arrived, Corwin smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. She had this celebration dance that was absolutely ridiculous, arms flailing everywhere, jumping around like a maniac. The other parents used to laugh, but not in a mean way. It was just pure joy, you know? "I'd love to see that dance sometime," Travis said, looking directly at Aurelia, even though her eyes remained closed. "Yeah, well..." Corwin's smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. "That was before. Everything's different now." The room fell back into silence, but it felt different somehow. Less hostile, more contemplative. Junia finished updating Aurelia's chart and moved to check the machines that monitored her vital signs. Everything was stable, which in this context was both good news and heartbreaking. Stable meant she wasn't getting worse, but it also meant she wasn't getting better. Travis remained in his chair, making no move to leave. Most visitors stayed for 15 or 20 minutes, long enough to feel like they had done something meaningful without overstaying their welcome. But something about this situation felt unfinished to him, like a conversation that had been started, but not completed. "You don't have to stay," Corwin said, but his tone had lost its earlier edge. "I know you probably have other places to be." "Actually, I don't," Travis replied. "Not anywhere more important than this." The afternoon sun slanted through the hospital room's single window, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. Travis had been sitting beside Aurelia's bed for over an hour now, and the silence had evolved from uncomfortable to something approaching companion. Corwin had taken a seat in the second chair, positioned closer to the foot of the bed, where he could watch both his daughter and their unexpected visitor. Junia moved efficiently around the room, checking IV lines and adjusting equipment with the practiced ease of someone who had performed these tasks thousands of times. But Travis noticed how her movements had become more deliberate, less rushed. She was creating reasons to stay in the room, as if she too sensed that something important was happening, even if none of them could quite define what it was. "The thing that gets me," Corwin said suddenly, breaking the extended quiet, "is how everyone wants to talk about miracles, about staying positive and fighting the good fight. as if cancer is just a matter of willpower, as if she's not trying hard enough if she doesn't get better. His voice carried the accumulated frustration of months spent navigating well-meaning but ultimately hollow advice. Travis could hear the anger underneath, not at any individual person, but at a situation that defied all attempts to make sense of. Last week, some woman in the grocery store told me that everything happens for a reason, Corwin continued, his hands clenching into fists. She said God must have a plan for Aurelia, that this was all part of some bigger purpose. I wanted to ask her what possible purpose could be served by an 8-year-old girl suffering like this, but I just walked away. What's the point of arguing with that kind of ignorance? Travis found himself nodding, understanding more than he had expected to. People say things like that because they're scared, he said. They need to believe there's some kind of logic to it all, some way to make sense of the senseless. It's not really about helping you, it's about helping them feel less helpless. Exactly, Corwin said, looking at Travis with something approaching gratitude. Finally, someone who gets it. I'm so tired of people telling me to have faith, as if I haven't been praying every single day since the diagnosis, as if faith is some kind of transaction where good things happen to people who believe hard enough. Aurelia's breathing had remained steady throughout this conversation, but Travis noticed that her face had relaxed slightly. The tight lines around her eyes had softened, and her grip on the bed sheets had loosened. She was listening, even if she wasn't participating. "What do the doctors say?" Travis asked carefully, not sure if this was territory Corwin wanted to explore with a relative stranger. Corwin was quiet for a long moment, staring at his daughter's face, as if memorizing every detail. "They say we should focus on making her comfortable. That's the phrase they use, comfort care. It's a nice way of saying they've run out of options." The words hit the room like a physical force, settling over everything with the weight of finality. Junia paused in her work, her hands stilling on the equipment she was adjusting. This was the reality that hung over every interaction in this room, the truth that colored every conversation and made every moment feel both precious and heartbreaking. "How long?" Travis asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "They won't give us specific numbers. Could be weeks, could be months. They say it depends on a lot of factors, but reading between the lines..." Corwin's voice trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Travis looked down at the small football still resting beside Aurelia's hand. It seemed insignificant now, almost foolish in the face of such overwhelming circumstances. What comfort could a promotional toy offer to a family confronting the unthinkable? "I keep thinking about all the things she's never going to experience," Corwin said, his voice growing thick with emotion. "First day of high school, learning to drive, falling in love, having kids of her own, all of it just gone. And I'm supposed to be grateful for the time we had. But honestly, right now, I'm just angry. Angry at the universe, angry at God, angry at everyone who gets to complain about normal problems while my daughter is dying." The raw honesty of this admission seemed to surprise even Corwin himself. He looked at Travis, as if expecting judgment or platitudes, but Travis just nodded, accepting the pain without trying to fix it or explain it away. "You're allowed to be angry," Travis said. "Anyone who tells you otherwise has never been where you are. The worst part," Corwin continued, "is watching her give up. She used to fight everything. Bedtime, vegetables, having to wear a coat when it was cold. She had this incredible spirit, this stubbornness that could drive you crazy, but also made you proud. And now she just accepts everything. The medications, the procedures, the pain. She's 8 years old, and she's already tired of living." As if responding to her father's words, Aurelia shifted slightly in the bed. Her hand moved closer to the small football, her fingers brushing against its surface. Everyone in the room held their breath, watching for any sign of engagement. "Aurelia?" Corwin said softly. "Sweetheart, are you awake?" Her eyes opened slowly, focusing first on the ceiling before turning toward her father. Then her gaze moved to Travis, studying his face with the serious intensity that children sometimes possess. "Are you famous?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. Travis smiled. "Some people think so. Does that matter?" Aurelia considered this question with the gravity of a philosopher. "I guess not. Famous people die too." The statement was delivered without self-pity or drama, just a matter-of-fact observation that demonstrated how thoroughly she understood her situation. It was perhaps the most heartbreaking thing anyone in the room had ever heard. "Yes," Travis said, matching her serious tone. "They do. Everyone does, eventually. Then why does everyone act like being famous makes you special? Aurelia asked. Like meeting famous people is supposed to make sick kids feel better? Corwin started to intervene, perhaps to apologize for his daughter's bluntness, but Travis held up a hand to stop him. This was the first real conversation Aurelia had initiated in days, and he didn't want to derail it with adult concerns about politeness. That's a really good question, Travis said. I think maybe people confuse being well-known with being important. The truth is, the most important people in your life probably aren't famous at all. Aurelia nodded thoughtfully. Like Junia, she's not famous, but she's here every day. She remembers that I don't like orange and that the IV hurts less if she uses the numbing cream first. Junia blinked back tears, touched by this recognition of her daily efforts to make Aurelia's experience more bearable. In a world of dramatic gestures and grand speeches, it was the small acts of consistency and care truly mattered. Exactly like Junia, Travis agreed. Being famous just means lots of people know your name. It doesn't make you a better person or give you special power. Can you make me not sick? Aurelia asked bluntly. No, Travis said, without hesitation. I can't do that. Then why are you here? The question hung in the air, challenging and direct. It was the same question Corwin had asked earlier, but coming from Aurelia, it carried different weight. This wasn't about adult skepticism or protective barrier. This was a child trying to understand the purpose of things in a world that had stopped making sense. Travis looked at the small football beside her hand, then back at her face. I'm here because someone told me you were here, and I wanted to meet you. Not because you're sick, not because it would make me feel good about myself, but because you seemed like someone worth knowing. Aurelia picked up the football, turning it over in her small hands. It's smaller than a real one. Yeah, it is. But sometimes small things are more portable, easier to hold on to. She squeezed the football gently, testing its give. My dad thinks this is pointless, she said, glancing toward Corwin. All of it, the visits, the gift, the pretending things might get better. Corwin's face crumpled slightly, hurt by his daughter's assessment even though he knew it was accurate. He had been trying so hard to protect her from his own despair, he hadn't realized how completely she had absorbed it anyway. What do you think? Travis asked Aurelia. She was quiet for a long moment, still working the small football in her hand. I think maybe it doesn't have to help everything to help something. The profound simplicity of Aurelia's observation settled over the room like a gentle revelation. Junia paused in organizing medical supplies, struck by the wisdom contained in those few words. Corwin stared at his daughter with a mixture of pride and surprise, as if seeing her clearly for the first time in months. Even Travis found himself reconsidering everything he thought he understood about hope and healing. That's very smart, Travis said, his voice carrying genuine respect, rather than the condescending tone adults often used with children. I think you might be the smartest person I've met in a long time. Aurelia's smile was small, but real, the first authentic expression of pleasure she had shown since his arrival. People always say kids with cancer are brave, but I don't feel brave. I feel scared most of the time. Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave, Travis replied. It means you're human. Brave is what you do when you're scared, not what you feel when you're not. She considered this, rolling the small football between her palms. Like how Junia gives me shots, even though she doesn't want to hurt me? Exactly like that. Junia wiped her eyes discreetly. Moved by this recognition of the daily moral courage required by her job, she had been struggling lately with the weight of caring for children she couldn't save, questioning whether her presence made any meaningful difference in the face of such overwhelming circumstance. I have bad dreams, Aurelia said suddenly, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Not about dying, about being forgotten, about nobody remembering that I was here. The admission hit everyone in the room with physical force. Corwin's breath caught in his throat, and he gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles went white. This was the fear he hadn't known how to address, the terror that went beyond physical pain or even death itself. Tell me about yourself, Travis said, leaning forward slightly. What should people remember about Aurelia Fenwick? She looked surprised by the question, as if no one had asked her to define herself in terms that weren't related to her illness. I don't know. I like puzzles, the really hard ones, lots of pieces, and I can do this thing with my tongue, she demonstrated, curling her tongue into a complex shape that made Travis laugh, despite the heaviness of the moment. That's incredible. I can't do that at all. Most people can't. It's genetic. She said the word carefully, clearly proud of her scientific vocabulary. I also memorized all the state capitals when I was 6, just because I wanted to see if I could do it. What's the capital of Vermont? Travis tested. Montpelier, she replied instantly. Most people think it's Burlington because that's the biggest city, but it's not. See? That's the kind of thing people should know about you. Not that you're sick, but that you're the kind of person who memorizes state capitals for fun. Aurelia brightened noticeably. I was working on all the countries in Africa before. She gestured vaguely at the medical equipment surrounding her bed. I got up to Mali. How many is that? 37. There are 54 total, so I was getting close. Travis pulled out his phone and opened a notes app. What if we finished the list together? Right now. All 54 countries in Africa. Corwin started to object, worried about Aurelia overexerting herself, but she was already nodding eagerly. For the first time in weeks, she had found something that engaged her mind beyond the narrow confines of her medical situation. Mali, you said. What comes next? Alphabetically. Mauritania, Aurelia said without hesitation. Then Mauritius. That's an island nation off the east coast. Travis typed as she spoke, creating a digital record of her knowledge. This is amazing. You really do know all of these. They worked through the list together, with Aurelia providing not just names but details about geography, population, and interesting facts she had accumulated during her studies. Junia found herself drawn into the conversation, occasionally looking up additional information on her tablet to verify some of Aurelia's more obscure claims. Seychelles is the smallest by population, Aurelia explained. Only about 98,000 people, and Djibouti has the lowest point in Africa. Lake Assal is 500 feet below sea level. How do you remember all this? Travis asked, genuinely amazed. I make up stories about the name, like Burkina Faso sounds like a really fancy pasta dish, and Chad sounds like a guy who would work at a surf shop. Even Corwin found himself smiling at his daughter's mnemonic strategies. This was the child he remembered from before the diagnosis. Curious, creative, endlessly fascinated by the world beyond her immediate experience. We should write these stories down, Travis suggested. Create a whole book of Aurelia's geography stories. That's silly, Aurelia said, but she was clearly pleased by the idea. The best ideas usually are. They spent the next hour working through the complete list, with Aurelia demonstrating the depth of her knowledge and Travis documenting everything she said. By the time they finished, she had provided detailed information about all 54 African nations, along with her invented stories for remembering their name. There, Travis said, showing her the completed list on his phone. Proof that Aurelia Fenwick knows more about African geography than 99% of adults. He studied the screen with satisfaction. It feels good to finish. The weight of that statement was not lost on anyone in the room. For a child facing an uncertain future, the simple act of completing a project carried enormous significance. Can I ask you something? Aurelia said, her tone becoming more serious. Of course. Do you think it matters, knowing all this stuff about places I'll never get to see? Travis was quiet for a moment, understanding that this was about much more than geography. I think knowing things makes you part of the world in a different way. Even if you can't travel to Mauritania, you carry a piece of it with you. You've made those places real in your mind, and that's a kind of visiting. Like mental traveling? Exactly. And now, whenever I think about any of those countries, I'll remember learning about them from you. So in a way, you've given them to me as a gift. Aurelia squeezed the small football tighter, processing this idea. So, even if I can't go places, I can still share them with people? Yes. And that means part of you gets to travel with everyone you've shared them with. She nodded slowly, seeming to find comfort in this concept. That's better than just being forgotten. You're not going to be forgotten, Aurelia. Not by your dad, not by Junia, not by me. The question isn't whether people will remember you, it's what they'll remember. I want them to remember that I knew things, that I was curious about the world. Then that's what will make sure they remember. For the first time since Travis had arrived, Aurelia reached out deliberately and took his hand. Her grip was weak, but determined, a small gesture that carried enormous weight. Thank you for helping me finish my list, she said. Thank you for teaching me about Africa. Corwin watched this exchange with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by seeing his daughter engaged and animated in a way he had feared was lost forever. This wasn't a miracle cure or a Hollywood ending, but it was something precious nonetheless, a moment of genuine connection. and shared purpose. As the afternoon wore on, other visitors came and went. Nurses checking vital signs, doctors reviewing charts, family friends stopping by with flowers and well wishes. But through it all, Travis remained in his chair beside Aurelia's bed, their conversation meandering through topics as diverse as quantum physics and her favorite ice cream flavors. "You're not like other famous people who visit," Aurelia observed during a quiet moment. "How so?" "You're not trying to make me feel better about being sick. You're just here, like a regular person." "I am a regular person. Being famous doesn't change that. But most famous people act like they're doing you a favor by showing up. Like you should be grateful they took time out of their important lives to visit sick kids." Travis winced, recognizing the truth in her assessment. "Have you had a lot of visits like that?" "A few. They usually want to take pictures and make speeches about never giving up hope. Then they leave, and everything goes back to being exactly the same as before." "Is this visit different?" Aurelia considered the question seriously. "Yeah. You asked me about me, not about my cancer, and you didn't promise things would get better. Would you have wanted me to?" "No. I'm tired of people lying to make themselves feel better about my situation." The honesty in Aurelia's voice was startling in its clarity. At 8 years old, she had developed a sophisticated understanding of adult motivations and social dynamics that most people never achieve. Travis found himself wondering how much of this wisdom came from her natural intelligence, and how much had been forced upon her by circumstances no child should have to navigate. "What would you want people to know about being sick?" he asked. "If you could tell everyone something they don't understand, what would it be?" Aurelia was quiet for a long time, staring at the ceiling while she formulated her thoughts. When she finally spoke, her words came slowly and deliberately. "I would tell them that sick kids aren't inspirational just because we're sick. Like, I'm not brave because I have cancer. I'm just a person who happens to have cancer. And sometimes I'm scared, and sometimes I'm angry, and sometimes I just want to watch cartoons without everyone acting like that's somehow amazing, because I'm dying." Corwin drew in a sharp breath at his daughter's casual use of the word dying, but Aurelia continued as if she hadn't noticed his reaction. "I would also tell them that we know when people are being fake. When they smile too big and talk too loud and act like visiting us is the most wonderful thing that's ever happened to them. We can tell the difference between people who actually want to be and people who feel like they should be here." Travis nodded, understanding the distinction she was making. "Which category do you think I'm in? At first, I thought you might be the second kind, but you've been here for hours, and you haven't taken any pictures or asked me to sign anything or tried to give me a pep talk about fighting hard. You just stayed, so I think you actually want to be here." "I do want to be here, more than I expected to." "Why?" It was the same question she had asked earlier, but now it felt different. Now it came from a place of genuine curiosity rather than defensive skepticism. Travis found himself really considering it, trying to identify what had drawn him to stay far longer than he had originally planned. "Because you're interesting," he said finally. "You know things. You think about things in ways that surprise me, and you're honest in a way that most adults have forgotten how to be. Spending time with you makes me think differently about things I thought I already understood." Aurelia smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. "That's the nicest thing anyone has said to me in months. Usually, people just tell me I'm brave, or strong, or inspiring, but that's all about being sick. You're talking about me as a person. You are a person, a remarkable one, even though I'm dying." The question was asked matter-of-factly, without self-pity or drama. She was simply stating a reality and asking Travis to confirm that it didn't negate her worth as an individual. "Especially because you're facing something this difficult, and you're still curious about African geography, and still thinking about other people's feelings. That tells me exactly what kind of person you are." Seat. Junia had been listening to this conversation while pretending to organize supplies, and she found herself struggling to maintain her professional composure. In 7 years of pediatric nursing, she had never heard a visitor engage with a terminal patient so directly and honestly about their situation. "Can I tell you a secret?" Aurelia asked, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Of course. Sometimes I pretend I'm already dead, just to see how it feels. Like, I imagine watching everyone from somewhere else, seeing how they react, what they say about me. It's not scary like you might think. It's just different." Corwin made a small sound of distress, but Travis remained focused on Aurelia, giving her the space to express thoughts that were clearly important to her. What do you see when you imagine that? Mostly, I see my dad crying, a lot. And I see people saying nice things about me at a funeral, but they're the kinds of things they say about all dead kids, about how I fought hard and never gave up hope, and inspired everyone around me. She paused, frowning slightly. But none of that is really true. I mean, I guess I fought, not because I was brave. I fought because the alternative was giving up, and giving up felt worse than fighting. That sounds like bravery to me, maybe. But the point is, in my imagination, nobody talks about the real stuff, about how I could do that thing with my tongue, or how I knew all the African countries, or how I once ate nothing but peanut butter sandwiches for 2 weeks straight, just to see if I could. Travis found himself smiling at this last detail. 2 weeks of just peanut butter sandwiches? My dad was so worried he took me to the doctor. But I wasn't sick or anything. I was just conducting an experiment. I wanted to see if it was possible to survive on only one food, and peanut butter seemed like the most complete option. And it worked fine, but I got really tired of peanut butter. Now I can't even smell it without feeling kind of sick. That's the most scientific 8-year-old experiment I've ever heard of. I read about it in a book about survival. The book said peanut butter has protein and fat and carbohydrates, so theoretically you could live on it for a while. I wanted to test the theory. Corwin shook his head, remembering the incident with a mixture of exasperation and fondness. She scared me to death. I thought something was wrong with her appetite, that the illness had already started affecting her eating. Turns out she was just being a tiny scientist. Were you always interested in science? Travis asked. Everything, really. Science, geography, history, languages. I taught myself some Spanish from YouTube video. ¿Hablas español? Un poquito, Travis replied, impressed despite himself. I was going to learn French next, but she gestured at the medical equipment surrounding them. It's hard to concentrate on new things now. The medications make my brain feel fuzzy sometimes. What's your favorite thing you've learned so far? Aurelia considered this question seriously, probably about black holes. They're these places in space where gravity is so strong that nothing can escape, not even light. And here's the really cool part. Time moves differently near them. If you could somehow get close to a black hole and then come back, you would have aged slower than everyone else. It's called time dilation. That's incredible. How do you know about that? I watched a lot of documentaries when I first got sick and had to stay in bed. Documentaries about space and ocean creatures, ancient civilization. It was like traveling without leaving the hospital. Travis was struck by how this connected to their earlier conversation about mental traveling, even confined to a hospital bed. Aurelia had found ways to explore the world and universe beyond her immediate circumstance. If you could go anywhere in space, where would you go? He asked. Probably Europa. It's one of Jupiter's moons, and scientists think there might be an ocean under all the ice. If there's an ocean, there might be life. Imagine being the first person to discover aliens, even if they're just tiny microorganisms. That would be pretty amazing. The thing is, even if I can't go to Europa or Mali or any of those places, I can still imagine them. I can still learn about them and think about what they might be like. And in a way, that's almost as good as visiting. She paused, looking directly at Travis with an intensity that was startling. I think that's what I want people to remember about me. Not that I was sick, but that I was curious, that even when I couldn't go places or do things, I still wanted to know about everything. I still cared about the world, even when the world felt like it didn't care about me. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of medical equipment and the distant sounds of hospital activity in the corridor. Travis felt something shifting inside him, a recognition that this conversation had become one of the most meaningful of his life. "Aurelia," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the room pay attention. "I want to promise you something." "I want to promise you something," Travis repeated, his voice steady but filled with emotion that made the air in the room feel charged with significance. He tightened his grip on Aurelia's small hand, looking directly into her eyes with an intensity that seemed to bridge the gap between their vastly different worlds. "I promise that when people ask me about this day, I won't tell them about meeting a sick little girl. I'll tell them about meeting Aurelia Fenwick, who knows every country in Africa, and can curl her tongue into impossible shapes, and once survived 2 weeks on nothing but peanut butter sandwiches in the name of science. Aurelia's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time since Travis had arrived, she looked genuinely surprised. I'll tell them about a girl who taught me that curiosity is more powerful than circumstance, and that you can travel the entire universe from a hospital bed if you have the right kind of imagination. I'll tell them about someone who understands black holes and time dilation and who dreams about discovering life on Europa. Corwin felt tears streaming down his face as he watched his daughter's expression transform. This wasn't the forced positivity or empty reassurance they had endured from so many other visitors. This was something different, a recognition of who Aurelia truly was, beyond her diagnosis and prognosis. But most important, Travis continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, I'll tell them that you taught me the difference between existing and being alive. Because even in this hospital room, even facing everything you're facing, you're more alive than most people I know. Aurelia squeezed his hand with surprising strength, her grip firm and purposeful. Do you really mean that? You're not just saying it to make me feel better? I mean every word. You've changed how I think about courage, about curiosity, about what it means to make a difference in the world. I came here thinking I was going to help you somehow, but you're the one who helped me. How did I help you? Travis paused, considering how to articulate something he was only beginning to understand himself. You reminded me that the most important conversations aren't about achievements or success or fame. They're about who we are when everything else is stripped away. You showed me that 8 years old or 80 years old, human connection is about seeing and being seen for who we really are. Junia wiped tears from her eyes, abandoning any pretense of busy work. She had witnessed thousands of interactions between patients and visitors, but nothing quite like this. A genuine mutual recognition that transcended the usual dynamics of pity and inspiration. I have another secret, Aurelia said, her voice taking on a more urgent quality. I'm scared that when I die, it will be like I never existed at all. Like all the things I learned and all the thoughts I had will just disappear, and it won't matter that I was curious about the world. Ooh, that's not going to happen, Travis said with absolute certainty. Every person you've shared your knowledge with carries a piece of it forward. Your dad knows about African geography now because of you. Junia learned about black holes. I'll never forget that Europa might have an ocean under its ice. Those thoughts, those discoveries you made, they don't die with you. They become part of everyone you've touched. Really, really. And more than that, the way you think, the questions you ask, the wonder you have about everything, that's contagious. People who meet you start looking at the world differently. They start paying attention to things they might have ignored before. Aurelia was quiet for a long moment, processing this idea. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger than it had been all day. Then I want to keep learning for as long as I can. I want to fill up every day with new discovery, so that when people remember me, they remember someone who never stopped being curious about everything. What do you want to learn about next? Travis asked. Deep ocean creatures. I started reading about them before I got too tired. But there's so much more. Did you know there are fish that make their own light? And creatures that live near volcanic vents, where the water is hot enough to boil you? I had no idea. That sounds incredible. We could learn about them together, Aurelia suggested hopefully. Like we did with the African countries. We could make a list of all the weird creatures that live in the deep ocean. I would love that, Travis said, and he meant it completely. Over the next hour, they dove into the mysterious world of deep-sea life, with Aurelia sharing what she already knew, and Travis looking up additional information on his phone. They discovered bioluminescent jellyfish, giant tube worms, and fish with transparent heads. Aurelia's enthusiasm was infectious, and even Corwin found himself drawn into their exploration of these alien-like creatures that thrived in Earth's most extreme environment. The anglerfish is my favorite, Aurelia declared. The female has this light that hangs in front of her mouth to attract prey, and the male is tiny and basically just attaches to the female permanently. It's like the weirdest marriage ever. Travis laughed, delighted by her perspective. That's definitely one way to look at it. And vampire squid aren't actually squid, and they don't suck blood. They're just named that because they look scary, but they actually eat marine snow. Marine snow? Dead stuff that falls down from the upper parts of the ocean. It's like underwater snowflakes, except it's made of tiny dead plants and animals. As they talked, Tobias Quarrel A local journalist who had been quietly documenting life at the children's hospital appeared in the doorway. He had been photographing different aspects of the hospital's daily operation when he noticed the unusual scene in Aurelia's. A famous visitor who had been there for hours, engaged in what appeared to be a deeply meaningful conversation with a young patient. Tobias raised his camera, then hesitated. This didn't feel like a photo opportunity or a publicity moment. This felt private and sacred, despite being in a semi-public space. But something about the quality of connection between Travis and Aurelia made him sense that this image might capture something important about human compassion, genuine care. He took a single photograph, Travis and Aurelia, with their heads bent together over his phone, completely absorbed in their shared exploration of deep-sea creatures. Neither of them noticed the camera, lost as they were in their conversation about bioluminescent organisms and the strange adaptations that allowed life to thrive in the deepest parts of the ocean. The thing about deep-sea creatures, Aurelia was saying, is that they prove life can exist anywhere, even in places that seem impossible. Where there's no sunlight and crushing pressure and almost no food, life finds a way. That's pretty hopeful, don't you think? Travis looked at her with something approaching awe. Here was a child facing the darkest circumstances imaginable, finding hope in the existence of creatures that thrived in Earth's most hostile environment. The metaphor was almost too perfect, too poignant to bear. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's very hopeful. I want to be like that," Aurelia said quietly. "I want to be proof that life can be beautiful, even in impossible places." "You already are," Travis replied, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "You already are." As the afternoon stretched into evening, their conversation continued to meander through topics both profound and mundane. They talked about space exploration and favorite book, about the physics of black holes and the best flavors of ice cream. Corwin and Junia found themselves drawn into the discussion, contributing their own thoughts and questions to what had become a genuine intellectual salon in a pediatric hospital room. When visiting hours officially ended, Travis made no move to leave. The nursing staff, recognizing something special was happening, quietly overlooked the time restriction. This wasn't about rules or protocols. This was about human connection at its most essential level. "I'm getting tired," Aurelia finally admitted as the sun began to set outside her window. "But this has been the best day I've had in a really long time." "It's been one of the best days I've ever had," Travis replied truthfully. "Will you come back?" "If you want me to." "I do. We still haven't finished learning about all the deep-sea creatures, and I want to teach you some of the Spanish I learned. It's a deal." As Aurelia's eyes began to close, she held tight to both the small football and Travis's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for letting me see you," Travis whispered back. Later that evening, Tobias Quarles uploaded the photograph he had taken to social media with a simple caption. "Sometimes the most profound conversations happen in the quietest places." Within hours, the image had been shared thousands of times, not because it showed a celebrity doing charity work, but because it captured something universal about human connection and the power of genuine presence. People began sharing their own stories about meaningful conversations with children, about the wisdom that emerges from unexpected places, about the importance of truly seeing and being seen by others. Aurelia's story, not as a sick child, but as a curious, brilliant, deeply thoughtful person, began to spread across the internet. But in the hospital room where it all began, none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that two people had found each other across vast differences in age, experience, and circumstance, and had created a moment of pure human understanding that would resonate far beyond the walls of that small space. Corwin sat beside his daughter's bed long after she had fallen asleep, holding her hand and thinking about how, for the first time in months, he had seen her truly alive, not just surviving, but engaged with the world in all its complexity and wonder. For Aurelia, this had been a day when she wasn't defined by her illness, but celebrated for her mind, her curiosity, and her remarkable perspective on life and death and everything in between. And for Travis, it had been a day when he learned that the most important thing he could offer wasn't his fame or his resources, but simply his presence and his willingness to see a remarkable person exactly as she was. Some moments change us, Not because they solve our problem or answer our questions, but because they remind us what it means to be fully human in relationship with others. This had been one of those moments.